Hello and welcome to the Ditton Works YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about super tweeters, but I'm not going to be talking about the super tweeters you'd find in, say, a Spendor BC1. I mean, there's no denying that the Coles HF unit certainly adds something to the Celestion HF 1300, which is completely done at 13 kilohertz. The Coles super tweeter was actually fitted for tax reasons. There was a different level of taxing for a three-way monitor than there was for a two-way monitor. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is a super tweeter you could fit on almost anything, and that's the Townshend Maximum Super Tweeters. And these are a very clever gadget, and they work similarly, if you like, to adding a subwoofer to your system. Now, both these and subwoofers cause controversy amongst my group of friends. Some of us love running subwoofers, some of us love running super tweeters. But it's a similar concept. So with a subwoofer, an active sub, you're trying to dial that in to the point of not where you can hear it, but where it's added an additional presence to the lower registers of your system, filling in the lower octaves of bass, so to speak. But it's very difficult to get that to integrate seamlessly. I've never really managed to achieve it, which is why I don't ever run active subs. I am somebody who's quite happy with the amount of low frequency output of most of the loudspeakers I've ever owned. In fact, some of them have too high a level of output in the bass region and would probably just be annoying to listen to over long periods of time. But these add a presence or an air around the HF, but it doesn't end there. When you run these, and you can dial them in to the sort of specification or sensitivity output of your loudspeakers by this dial on the back. So you've got 0 to 6, so you can really dial them in much like you would a subwoofer. However, I found it much easier to dial in these HF units than I did an active subwoofer. So Townshend is a company that really have developed some products that are really good at just eking out a little bit more out of your system. Some of which really react in a very positive way. Something like the Townshend podiums is a good example. When I was at the Hi-Fi show a couple of weekends back, Townshend's stand had a setup with two loudspeakers, one sitting on the podiums and one sitting on the isoacoustics feet, with sort of seismographs, if you like, sitting on top. And if you stamped your feet, the seismograph would kick off and show you how quickly the isolation feet were returning the speaker to their neutral position. And I've got to say, the Townshend podium wiped the floor with the isoacoustics in terms of returning the speaker to their natural resting position. And the other thing is obviously these. And I've been fascinated by these. I've wanted a pair of these for a long time. A good friend of mine ran a pair on Quad 57s. Another friend of mine runs them on his, and they've always said positive things. So I thought, I've got to check these out, because there's one thing on my Spendor Classic 2.3s which has always not quite been there, is that the HF. If you go back to one of my old videos where I compared these against the Spendor S8 and the Spendor SP22, I'd be the first one to admit that both of those loudspeakers actually had better levels of detail than these ones did. However, these won overall because they had far better bass response, were more dynamic than the SP22s, and they were far more musical than the S8s. But that did still leave me with a loudspeaker that I wasn't absolutely happy with the HF. And more recently, listening to things like the Russell K Red 120s, the Russell K Red 100s, the Neat Magisters, all of those loudspeakers have absolutely perfect HF, which is making me put off. I'm put off by listening to these. So, adding these into the mix, I wondered if that would solve those problems. And I've got to say straight away, they did. This is very interesting. Now, just like subwoofers, this will cause controversy, no doubt. But adding these HF units, it's not about hearing them. If you turn them up to the level that you can hear them, they're going to be too loud. They're going to be too loud and upset the tonal balance of what you're trying to achieve. Now, running them from 0 all the way around the range, what I did is I plugged them in, set them up, so you've got Townshend's own cryogenically treated wire that comes with them. You plug their wire into your input terminals on your loudspeakers. If they're bi-wired, I did it in the HF input. You run your amplifier cables coming out and going into the speakers into the back of the Townshend wires. So you're just piggybacking them off your loudspeakers. I was initially wondering if any impedance mismatching was going to occur here, but these have got quite a high impedance and I've not detected any issues with variance in volume levels. So if they were a low impedance, they would probably draw more from the amplifier and potentially upset some balancers there. But they're quite a low impedance, so they're not going to upset the amplifier too much, one would think, or one would hope. With regards to sensitivity, that's all adjustable by the switches on the back. And I set them up, set them to 0 and listen to some music that I'm familiar with just running my Spendors. I then got up, set them to 1, sat back, listened to the same track, repeat 2, 3, 4. And by the time I got to 4, I realized that was far too elevated. Drop back to 3, still too elevated. Drop back to 2. And this is interesting here, that I contacted a chap who's an audiophile journalist who also has Spendor Classic 2.3s and also has these, and his preferred setting was 2. I've got to say my preferred setting was actually 1. Now all of us do hear slightly differently, and I've got quite sensitive hearing to the upper mid-band, lower HF to HF region. If something's not quite right or hard in those regions, my ears soon tell my brain I don't like it. So running them at 1, which is actually the lowest setting, I found was a perfect balance for these, especially as sometimes I do run these at fairly elevated volumes. Now, when I engaged these and got them dialed in properly and had a listen to the overall effect, what shocked me is not the fact that they just improve the spacing in the HF, improve the HF, they also actually help in the mid-band and very surprisingly in the bass. And this is really interesting. So with them dialed in, listening to all the things, discovering that they improve the frequency right across the range, dead happy with them. I then tried switching them off, re-listening to music, and found it very difficult to enjoy the same music with them taken out of the system. So they've been in ever since, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. I then tried these with different loudspeakers. So the first pair of speakers I tried them, other than the Spendors, were the Neat Magistra. Now that's got a very good ribbon tweeter in it already. They've got exceptionally good levels of HF, and I don't have any complaints in that department. But adding the Townsends in still gave you that additional air around the instruments. It was fascinating. It still improved the mid-range somewhat, and it still altered the bass somewhat. And I'm wondering, if you think about it, when a bass note is plucked, the actual plucking of the string is a high frequency sound. It's only when the string is released that then there's that low resonance as the strings wobble around in a sort of figure of 8 fashion. If you think about it, a bow being drawn across, the actual initial sound is probably much higher in the frequency than the string resonating. So although things that appear to be bass notes actually possibly start off in the higher registers, which is why these help with the bass, it cleans it up. And that was definitely apparent on the Neat Magistra. The next loudspeaker I tried was the Russell K Red 120s, which is another loudspeaker that I don't think needs anything fixing in the HF. They're phenomenal sounding loudspeakers. I absolutely love listening to those. Fitted the Townshend Super Tweeters into the equation, and again there was just more instrument separation and spacing in the HF, and actually helped with some of the mid-band frequencies and some of the lower registers as well. So it's not just down to a speaker that I think might have some mildly off-putting areas in the HF, which were improved by these. These actually improved speakers that have no issues in the HF as far as I was concerned on initial listening. So all round, over 3 very different styles of loudspeakers, two-way stand mount with a ribbon, and a two-way floor standing soft dome tweeter, it improved all of them. So they're very user friendly, very easy to set up, don't upset the amplifier. Win-win. I thought they were exceptionally good. I'm going to try some sound clips. I don't think the microphone is good enough to really pick up the differences, but I will try it for you guys. Now if you pay attention, the piece of music I'm going to use is from the Bullet soundtrack, And I've particularly used this vinyl because the HF higher frequencies in this recording are quite recessed anyway. And listening to that with my standard Spendors versus say the Neat or the Russell K's, you can definitely detect that the HF is quite rolled off, it's quite recessed. Adding the Townshend Super Tweeters in just rectified that. It put it right. It made it much nicer to listen to. Now there are certain bits in this track where there's sort of a slight drum roll through, a couple of different pads, let's say, and up to some hi-hats, and that's just much more coherent and cleaner on the Super Tweeters. It's still pleasant without them, but it's just adding a layer, a texture, a speed, a coherency to those loudspeakers that's really enjoyable. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll give it a try. It may not come through very well on the clip, but this is the Ditton Works review on the Townshend Maximum Super Tweeters. Been an absolutely thoroughly interesting experiment. Take care, guys. I'll catch up with you soon.